Welcome to Truth in Christ. I'm Joshua Dobbs. I'm so glad you could join me today. Today we've got a good message for you. We're going to be talking about the Mystery Babylon paradigm. But today we're going to be focusing mostly on the symbolic parallels between the Old Testament Babylon and Mystery Babylon, where Belshazzar desecrates the golden vessels of God. And we see Mystery Babylon drinking out of a golden cup. And we see that in the Old Testament, Babylon is the golden cup in the Lord's hand and makes the nations drunk and mad. And we see in the New Testament, Mystery Babylon's golden cup. And we see the kings of the earth drinking the wines of her fornication in Revelation. And we'll see Belshazzar desecrating the golden vessels that came out of God's temple, drinking wine out of them, and how desecration will also play a role with the Antichrist, who will actually rule over Mystery Babylon, because it will be a great city in the Antichrist kingdom. So we're going to look at those parallels between the Old and the New Testament. Now this is going to be a two-part series, but where does this all begin? It actually begins with Babel, because Babel was the first biblical account of post-flood rebellion. God gave a commandment to Noah, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. But then we see that later, people travel from the east to the land of Shinar, which is also known as Sumer, and they build a great city there, and they build a tower up to heaven. These people have no desire to spread across the face of the earth. So God, seeing that nothing would be withheld from them and the rebellion, God comes down and confuses their speech. And that's the reason why it is called Babel, because in Hebrew, Babel means confusion. So the land of Babel later became Babylon, which was the capital of the Babylonian Empire. Now, before I continue, I would like to ask you, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below, turn on that notification bell, and set it to all so you can stay up to date on all my latest videos, because honestly, your subscription doesn't mean anything if you're not getting notified every time I upload a video. Like, share, comment. Every interaction with this channel helps this channel out so we can spread this message around the world. I appreciate all your support. And now let's continue with Belshazzar. Again, now we're talking about the Babylonian Empire, and the capital of the Babylonian Empire is Babylon. Now, if we actually look at what happened in Babel, in the land of Shinar, this is the same place. They rebelled against God. So let's talk about Belshazzar for a minute, because Belshazzar does something incredibly terrible. Belshazzar has this drunken party in which he takes all the golden and silver vessels of God, and he actually takes these things and desecrates them by having this drunken party with his concubines and all the leading people of Babylon. And then you have to understand that these people are pagan. These people worshipped Bel, and Bel worship was a lascivious harlot religion. Bel worship included lascivious temple prostitutes that would perform lascivious acts with the people there in order to get their gods to do something that they wanted. They would be working towards a blessing of some sort, and they thought if they practiced this some type of magical intercourse that they could actually get their gods to move for them. So when we begin to see this drunken party, we actually relate it back to the golden vessels. And actually, that's one of the first things that is mentioned about Belshazzar's party. He doesn't just take the golden and silver vessels. There's an emphasis on the golden vessels in which Belshazzar and his people drink wine out of. And then that takes us to the great harlot. So in Revelation, the 17th chapter, the 1st to 2nd verse says, "And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will shew unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication." Now notice that it is talking about her wine. And then we go on down to the 4th through 5th verse. It says, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abomination and filthiness of her fornication, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon, the great mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now I want you to notice that she has a golden cup in her hand. Now if we take that back to Belshazzar's party, they take the vessels of God, they pour wine in it. It's this drunken party. And remember, Babylon is over the nations. Babylon has conquered Israel and many other nations. And they conquered the Assyrian Empire as well. So they are over many nations, and towards their end, they were having this drunken party. Now remember what happened to Belshazzar at the end of the party. There was handwriting on the wall, so they couldn't understand what the phrase was, Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin. And they sent for Daniel, and Daniel told them what the meaning of the handwriting on the wall was. He told them that their kingdom would be destroyed and divided. So they were eating and they were drinking and they were having a good time, and then sudden destruction comes upon them. This is the same template that we see when it comes to Mystery Babylon, the great harlot. So we see the harlot is drinking out of a golden cup, just like they did in the days of Belshazzar. And it is a drunken party. Now, if we go into Jeremiah, the 51st chapter, the 6th through 8th verse, says, flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand. Now notice that, a golden cup in the Lord's hand. We look back at Revelation, the 17th chapter. What is Babylon drinking out of? She's drinking out of a golden cup. Now let's look at this in the 8th verse. It says, and Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Now it tells us that she's made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine. Therefore the nations are mad. It's the same thing that's being said in Revelation, the 17th chapter. It says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So what is happening in Revelation, the 17th chapter, is the same way that Jeremiah describes Babylon. Now you have to understand that Jeremiah is actually talking about Babylon herself. But the parallels between what Jeremiah says and what Revelation says is very similar, because this is a paradigm. So what we're looking for in Mystery Babylon is the same thing that happened with Babylon in the days of the exile, and when Belshazzar was defeated, when sudden destruction came upon him because he was eating and drinking and made the nations, the kings of the earth, drunk with this wine. People were coming together for this drunken party. You see the parallels here between the great whore of Babylon and Belshazzar's drunken party and the golden cup. Remember what Daniel said about Babylon. He told Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. So gold represents Babylon. Gold represents Babylon. So these things connect. It says the nations have drunken of her wine and are mad. So what does it mean when they are mad? It means they are deranged or delusional. They're out of their mind. If you go back to 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, what does it say about the end? It says in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter and the 11th verse, it says, and for this cause God shall send them strong delusions that they should believe a lie. So let's tie together what we went over so far. Babylon is the head of gold. Belshazzar, during his party, takes the vessels, the golden vessels that was used in God's temple, and drunk wine out of them. Babylon is referred to as the golden cup in the Lord's hand, and all the nations drunk of that wine and were made mad. And then we see that Mystery Babylon has a golden cup in her hand, and she is making the nations drink of the wine of her fornication. And what happens? The nations go mad. The nations become deranged. The nations become delusional. Now think about in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, it talks about that God would send them a strong delusion that they would believe a lie. This is Mystery Babylon. This is the great apostasy. Why? Because Baal worship has always been a problem in the Old Testament. So Baal worship is a very lascivious religion that was preferred by many groups and tribes and nations. And why? Because it was a lascivious religion. It allowed them to do a lot of things that they weren't supposed to do. That's the reason why Mystery Babylon is referred to as the Great Harlot, and it is called the wine of her fornication, because it is a harlot religion. And then we see this great warning. If we actually look in Revelation, the 18th chapter and the 4th verse, it says, "And I held another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues." So the warning in Jeremiah's time is similar to the warning in Revelation to get out of Babylon, to actually get out of the city. Now, as we read on, we will find out that Mystery Babylon is actually a city that will be divided. But it tells us in Revelation, the 18th chapter, the 4th verse, to come out of her that ye be not partakers of her sin. In Jeremiah, the 51st chapter and the 6th verse, tells them to flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul, be not cut off in her iniquity. So the warning is the same. So what we're finding in Revelation, the 17th and the 18th chapter here, is very similar to the warnings that Jeremiah gave in the 51st chapter. So what did they do that was so wrong? Well, if you read in Daniel, they desecrated the vessels of God. They treated them irreverently. They drank wine out of those golden vessels. So there was this desecration that provoked God to vengeance. Belshazzar allowed everybody up to and including his concubines to drink out of these vessels. So this was the last straw, as they say, that broke the camel's back. They were having a good time eating and drinking, and sudden destruction comes upon them. See, Babylon trusted in their great fortress, and they had a water source that ran right under the wall. So they had a constant supply of water. And so what Darius done, he actually routed that water to lower the water level so he could walk in under their walls. And sudden destruction comes upon Belshazzar and his people. This is the paradigm. The sudden destruction, the desecration of God's vessels. Now, let's look at desecration. In 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, the Antichrist sits in the temple of God, showing himself like he is a god. Jesus refers to the prophecy mentioned by Daniel about the abomination that causes desolation. Again, the desecration of the temple. So their crime was desecration. And the crime in the end is going to be an irreverent attitude towards God and a desecration of the temple. Only this time it's actually going to be a man setting himself up in the temple of God, showing himself that he is a god. So people buy into this delusion, and actually Belshazzar actually believes that he can get away with drinking out of the golden vessels, further desecrating the temple that has already been destroyed. And actually, if you read Jeremiah, the 51st chapter, the 9th through 11th verse, it says, "We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go every one into his own country, for her judgment reacheth unto heaven, and is lifted up even to the skies. The Lord hath brought forth our righteousness. Come, and let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord our God. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon, to destroy it." Now get this part. "Because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple." So now notice that it says the vengeance of his temple. But if we read in Daniel about the abomination that causes desolation, even in Daniel the 11th chapter, and how Jesus talks about the abomination that causes desolation, that it's going to be this future event. And we read in 2 Thessalonians the 2nd chapter about the Antichrist setting himself up in the temple, showing himself like he is a god. So when it comes to the temple desecration, the great harlot will be involved, drinking out of the golden cup, which goes back to Belshazzar's drunken party where they were drinking out of God's golden vessels. That's the reason why in Jeremiah, Babylon is referred to as the golden cup in the Lord's hand. That it would be an instrumental part of God's vengeance. So there are a lot of people who spiritualize the temple. They try to say it's not literal. This is not going to be a literal temple. The paradigm and the prophecy requires a literal temple. It has to be desecrated. This is instrumental. This is going to be a part of it. A paradigm is a blueprint that we look at, that we see that is repeated over and over and over again. So we actually see the paradigm of rebellion in the Tower of Babel. We see the paradigm of rebellion and desecration in Belshazzar's drunken party, and then we see that rebellion and the desecration happening when it comes to the great harlot, referencing the golden cup. So there is a paradigm or a template that is being repeated over and over again. And as we continue to explore this paradigm, you will actually see more of this unfold. But I also want to speak to those who actually say that this prophecy isn't futuristic. Because there's people who try to say, oh, this is just a futurist view and this has all been fulfilled. Well, you know, if you actually lived back in the days of Jesus, you would probably have been telling Jesus, oh, he was just a futurist, because he looked at the prophecy of the abomination that causes desolation as a future prophecy. And the people in his time considered that fulfilled. Read the Maccabees. People looked at the abomination that causes desolation as fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes. However, Jesus understood typological prophecy because Antiochus Epiphanes was a type, but he was not the antitype. In other words, he was a foreshadowment of the Antichrist, but he did not fulfill every prophecy that was mentioned in Daniel when it comes to the abomination that causes desolation. That's the reason why Jesus saw it as unfulfilled, because he understood typology. The problem is with people who think that Revelation is already fulfilled. They don't understand the concept of a typological prophecy that needs greater fulfillment. So we see the paradigm where Babylon was the head of gold, but then we also look at Jeremiah where Babylon was the golden cup in the Lord's hand and the nations drunk of that cup and were mad. And then we see Belshazzar's party where he, his wives, his concubines, and the princes and the people of the land were drinking out of the golden vessels of God, desecrating them. And then we see in Revelation that the whore of Babylon has a golden cup in her hand and the nations are drinking of that wine of her fornication. Now this is an idolatrous nation, but we also see the Antichrist desecrate the temple of God in the future, as we read in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, where the Antichrist will desecrate the temple of God by sitting in the temple and posing as a god. Now this will be an idolatrous nation just like Babylon. Now we will go deeper into that in the next video where we talk about the idolatry and the destruction of Babylon. I hope you join me in this next video as we explore the second part of this paradigm. I really hope you enjoyed this message, and as I said before, if you haven't already, click the subscribe button down below, hit that notification bell, and hit like, share, and comment. Trigger that YouTube algorithm to help us spread this message around the world. I also hope that you found this message edifying. God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.